Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Welcome to the Auckland Unitarian Church, a place that has been a spiritual home for 118 years. Unlike many other churches, we don't have a creed. Instead, we have 7 principles of how we are trying to act together. Those are the principles on the wall over there. Today, I'd like to concentrate on principle number 6. The goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. That is not just a Unitarian goal, it was also a goal for New Zealand 114 years ago, when our politicians set up our first national school system. They wanted a school system that would reach all children, whatever their religion, and they wanted to remove any hurdles which would hinder some of the children from coming. I've just spent 2 months going through all the parliamentary debates about religion in 1877, when they passed our first universal education law. And there were 10 resolutions trying to set up 10 different kinds of Christian emphasis. And they all got turned down one by one. And I'd like to go through those later in the service today and say what were all the alternatives they looked at and what were the reasons. What were the reasons they had for wanting our schools to be secular. I hope you will enjoy this. I hope you will support our community of peace today. And I hope you'll also think of how we can make our society as a whole more inclusive, as it was then. We sincerely welcome any visitors. We invite you to take part in our worship and our discussion afterwards. And we hope that you will also join us in a cup of tea or coffee afterwards. Welcome. For our opening words, I'm going to quote the comments of one of our politicians back in 1887, Samuel Shrimsky, who was a Jewish leader. He was commenting on a suggestion that the school day should start with a reading from the Bible and a reading of the Lord's Prayer. And that had been suggested by the people who originated this bill, the education bill. But Shrimsky said if that happened, Jews would be very unhappy about their children attending their schools. Every morning they were going to be having the Lord's Prayer and a reading from the Christian Bible. And he added, "The Jews are as loyal as Christian subjects. The Jews bear a fair proportion of the costs of supporting the state. Then why should they, because they happen to be in a minority, be compelled either to go to extra expense in providing their own education for their children, or send their children to the state schools to listen to religious instruction repugnant to their feelings? It is said that they need not enter the school unless they please, until after the religious instruction has been given. But sir, what does that mean? Simply that the children of the Jews would be held up as so many targets for the ridicule and sneers of the other children. Such a feeling should not be encouraged. It should be prevented, so that as citizens, our children should all grow up as one family." That's it. When you celebrate well, but remember that nearby someone else is grieving. And when you grieve well, but remember that nearby you somebody is celebrating. Therefore, as we gather here in this special place, we mark both grief and celebration for absent friends, and for those whose company we enjoy right now, we light this chalice. Well, my theme is why New Zealand opted for secular education in 1877. In the campaign we've got for secular schools, our main opposition is the Church's Education Commission. And they believe it is a good thing to teach Christianity to all children, even those who are not Christians or from Christian homes. And they say on their website, while acknowledging that there are other views about life that could have a place in religious programs in schools, it is appropriate in New Zealand to give particular emphasis to the Christian faith, the Bible, and the life and teachings of Jesus, because of their pervasive influence through our cultural heritage and history, and their continuing relevance. Well, I was surprised to learn that our New Zealand Education Act, back in 1877, disagrees with this completely. It does not mention the influence of Christianity or as part of our cultural heritage. It does not mention the word Bible nor the word Jesus. They're not anywhere in this Education Act. In their place stands a single clause of 9 words: the teaching shall be entirely of a secular character. Now that is very, very surprising when you consider that our population back then was 95% Christian. And that fact was quoted a number of times during the debate. The Christians who wanted to introduce a bit of Christianity into the school said, look, 95% of people want to do this. We've just got to do it. But the brief answer is that these Christians, and there were plenty of them in Parliament, did not want Christianity to be mentioned because they thought it would be unfair to people who were not Christians. Simple. It was not a matter of promoting Christianity. It was a matter of making schools that were friendly to everybody. And this subject was discussed very thoroughly over 14 months. There were 10 amendments to the Education Act proposed over that time, and they were proposing one form of Christianity or another, and all 10 were voted out. So it took me 2 months of just about all my time going through all those debates. There were thousands of pages of debate, and I searched through it all for the words Bible, Christianity, Education Act, and found all the speeches that were about it. And it helped me find why they said no, because the people who said no and voted no had all spoken on the subject before and spelt out their feelings in detail. I also found that a number of them gave their religion in their speech, so you could identify them. And I also found there were a number who didn't quote their religion, but I could find it out from other historical sources. So I think I can quite safely say what Christians, what Jews, what atheists thought back then, and what Catholics and Protestants, because all their views came up in this debate. I've got from that research, I've got 30 pages of quotations from this. And I was going to read you the whole 30, but instead I've got 4 pages of it as a sample. The first proposal was that teaching should be secular apart from a Bible reading and a prayer at the start of each school day. That was part of the original education proposed by Justice Minister James Bowen. And in my research, I found that he was a member of the Church of England. He said, when we establish a system out of public funds, and while men differ so seriously on religious subjects as they do now, we must take care that we do not allow every schoolmaster to give such religious teaching as he may think right and suitable. Cases have occurred in which parents had very reasonable grounds for complaint. The only way to be absolutely fair is to forbid the teacher to give the pupils any religious instruction whatever. So having basically said the school should be totally secular, he then made himself a liar by proposing to have that one little bit of religion in it, of reading the Bible and reading the Lord's Prayer. And he explained that in his opening speech as well. He said, I feel certain that it is the desire of... I'm certain it is the desire of 1920s of the people of this country that the Bible should not be absolutely excluded from our public schools. There's the 95% figure, quoted right at the start of the debate. But he said, no child should be obliged to attend those Bible readings and the Lord's Prayer if their parents objected. This compromise was accepted by another MP, Dr. James Wallace, who was a Presbyterian minister. And he said schools should not teach theology, but there should be a recognition, not a denial, of deity and immortality. So both their speakers did not want a huge amount of teaching about religion. They just wanted this small amount, Bible reading and prayer, at the opening of school every day. But Sir George Grey, who was also a member of the Church of England, said reading the Scriptures and the Lord's Prayer would be an act of hypocrisy, because in many cases the teacher would not believe what he was reading, and the children would soon realise this, and it would be more harmful than omitting religion altogether. He said it would also do an injustice to some non-Christian schoolmasters who may object to reading the Scriptures and could lose their jobs if they refused. Another Christian, Vincent Pike, said it would cause offence to 2/3 of the population. I don't know where he got that figure of 2/3, but see, it contrasts with the 95% that others was quoting. He said 2/3 of New Zealanders would object. But the debate showed that Catholics and Jews were both objecting to it. But Pike said, as a Protestant, in heart and feeling, I protest against it. What is the vital principle of Protestantism? It is the principle of religious freedom. And how can you have that if you force upon the people one particular system of thought? A fifth Member of Parliament, Edward Wakefield, seemed to me from reading that he had no religion at all. I couldn't find anywhere a statement for sure what his beliefs were, but in his actual speech, he is ridiculing religion. He said he was sarcastic about Bowen's reference to a higher power. He said it can't be a very certain feeling of immortality that he's got if he needs to have children reading the Bible that they don't believe in to keep them going. He said the opt-out provision was the worst of all, the provision that children whose parents objected to religion could stay outside. He said that would mean that they would have to stand out in the rain until the reading was over. And then I quoted you earlier the Jewish member Samuel Skrimsky, who made the same point, that if children were opted out, it would lead to them being bullied for being Jews. And jumping ahead to our own time today, I'd say this is one of the main objections to Bible in schools still, that parents who opt their children out of these classes are, to quote Shrimpsky, are held up as targets of ridicule and the sneers of other children. That most definitely happens in several hundred schools today. Now I've lost page 3, it must be out of order. This is fun. No, they're glued together. Robert Stout was another MP back then, and he was a rationalist and was also a Unitarian. And he said in this debate, a large number of colonists do not belong to any church whatever. They have consciences too, and their consciences are violated if they see their taxes going to support churches which they do not believe in. So they put this idea to the vote. They put the idea, not the actual words of Bowen's bill, but those 9 words from it remained in the bill, those 9 words which said, the teaching shall be entirely of a secular character. And the voting for that clause was the ayes 39, the noes 19, a ratio of 67%, was pretty well exactly what Pike had said. They were 67% of them who objected to it. And so that is the real explanation of why our country became secular, that even the Christians wanted to be fair to others. And it was not just Christians who said this, but there was also one Jew, and there were 2 people who today would be called atheists, Robert Stout and Edward Wakefield. But that was not the end of Bowen's idea of Bible reading, because it was immediately revived by another speaker in amended form. And the question he raised was, would Bible reading and prayers be acceptable if the decision about holding them was made by local parent committees? So one school where they had lots of Christian families, they would have the Bible. Another school, they might not have the Bible. This idea was suggested by Oswald Curtis, who was the MP for Nelson. And he was an expert in this idea because he was one of the founders of the provincial school system they had in Nelson. Before there was universal education, a number of provinces had their own provincial form of education, which didn't reach a large number of the people, but the Nelson one, led by Oswald Curtis, allowed each school to choose the religion that would be dominant in that school. And he said that one of the things they did was to choose their own teachers, to choose their own Bible readings, and choose whether they should have Bible readings at all. And that decision would be made by the local committees. He said, he quoted the same statistics. He said, I'm sure that there are 19/20ths of the people, I'm sure that there are not 19/20ths of the people who want the Bible to be excluded, but I'm not sure all the 19/20ths want it to be compulsory. So he said make it voluntary for the local parents. But Edward Bagent, who is another MP from the Nelson province, said the system had worked well, but I got a massive surprise when I read the rest of his speech, because he said of these schools in the Nelson area, although they're entitled to read the Bible or not, I think there was only one of them that actually reads the Bible. So it seemed rather strange. They had all this fuss about freedom to read the Bible or not, and all but one of them had voted to stay secular. And he explained part of the reason for it. He said there was a Nelson Church of England synod 2 years previously who discussed whether to include Bible in schools, and their bishop said it was the duty of clergy to see that children were taught the Bible, and this was primarily done through their Sunday schools. So there was a third reason why Anglicans would not want Bibles to be read in schools, because they believed this was the job of the clergy in the Sunday schools. I couldn't find Bagent's religion, but that quote suggests that he may have been Church of England, since he knew about this Church of England debate. Hugh Lusk was another MP who spoke on it, and he opposed the Nelson arrangement. He said it was a sham, because he said, judging by what Bagent had said, that all the religious schools in Nelson were in fact no different from secular schools, because they didn't read the... So he said, why do you need to have this provision when nobody is using it? And he said he couldn't understand why any committee would want to have such a choice, unless they were planning to secretly introduce religion on the side. For instance, by having the same teacher teach them in Bible and schools classes after the school was over. So there was a feeling that the religious supporters were not being honest. Another speaker, Cecil de la Tour, opposed the Nelson compromise because he said it would invite opting out the non-Christian children. And he said the Nelson proposal would not solve the problem. He said, I think if we cannot decide the matter in this House, we have no right to ask local committees to settle it. And Edward Wakefield, who I think is an atheist, had similar views. He said, the Honourable Member for Nelson City proposes that we should allow irresponsible committees to inflict the wrong which we are hesitating to inflict ourselves. So that amendment was put to the vote, and the result was 65% were opposed to even having it on a voluntary basis. A third issue was even more surprising to me. This was a suggestion that they shouldn't teach history in these first New Zealand state schools. Not teach history, why would you imagine? The reason was that Catholics and Protestants preferred different history books. and the MP for Nelson, Oswald Curtis, he was one of the main promoters of all these strange little alternatives. He identified the problem. He said that the history was a problem in the schools of Nelson, and he said they solved the problem by letting the local school committees choose. But he said why history was a problem. Any of our books of English history, which contain histories of Henry VIII and of Elizabeth, contain passages which no Roman Catholic can conscientiously permit his children to read. The histories which we use in our schools are sectarian histories, Protestant histories, histories from one point of view, having no mercy whatever for the Roman Catholic faith. Now, it is not fair that we should expect Roman Catholics to send their children to schools where they read sectarian histories altogether opposed to their teaching. Samuel Hodgkinson agreed it was a problem, but he said there's a very simple answer. If there were some committee or board appointed to arrange these history books in such a way that a fair account of history was provided without any extreme views, that would be the answer. In fact, he even knew the name of a book that would do it. So I would think nobody would have an objection to Dr. Lingard's history. Presumably he told it from a neutral point of view and not from a Catholic point or a Protestant point of view. And another speaker, William Montgomery, had a different solution. I think provision must be made so that no child shall be compelled to read certain parts of books on history. So these suggestions were all put to the vote. Edmund Bath from Hokitika moved that the word history should be omitted from the list of subjects. The question was put and it was lost. 54% said that history should continue, 54 said that, and 6 said no, making it 90% of them who wanted history to remain on the school subject list. But then there was another history amendment. The original bill said that no child should be compelled to be present at the teaching of history whose parents objected. And another MP said those words should be dropped. He wanted it to be basically compulsory for everybody to go to history lessons, no exceptions. And that was put to the vote as well. And the ones who opposed that were 93%. So now we've got 93% of people are secular when it came to that issue. They wanted parents to have the right to opt out of history if it was being taught. The next big issue, and I think the thorniest one of all, was should the government subsidise the secular part of teaching at religious schools? And again, it was Oswald Curtis from Nelson who spoke up for religious people. I don't think he was religious himself, but I think he was defending his Catholic friends. And he said in the Catholic schools and the Protestant schools in Nelson, they all get subsidised by the Nelson provincial government. And he said that would be a good solution to the issue that's worrying Catholics. If they could set up their schools and they could receive a subsidy, not the full cost of the school, but just a subsidy for the secular part of the teaching, and they should get a subsidy. And this idea was also put to the vote, and it was defeated fairly heavily. The people who opposed this idea of giving subsidies to Catholic and other religious schools was only 62%. So again, just under 2/3 of the MPs wanted this religious support idea. And the final resolution was that religious schools should have to pay rates for the land that their schools are on. And there was a bill that was introduced by Robert Stout that said, this is because they were struggling to find money to pay for all these schools. He said it would help if the schools didn't have to pay rates for the land that their buildings were on. And he moved that, and someone opposed a resolution that this same rates rebate should be given to the Catholic Church. And they were feeling very anti-Catholic by this time, and 93% voted against Catholics having any subsidy. And that proved to be one of the thorniest issues of the whole debate. because the debate came up the following year. I've missed out a bit of my story. After the bill got passed by all three stages in the House of Representatives, they had two houses of Parliament back in those days, also the Judicial Council. So it went to the Judicial Council to consider it, and before they could consider it, there was a vote of no confidence in the government, so the whole government was sacked. And so the House of the Judicial Council didn't know whether they should go ahead with the bill when they didn't know who was the government. And they eventually they formed a new government, which included Sir George Grey and Robert Stout and others who were very much in favour of this bill. And they voted that they would not drop the drop the bill of education. They very much supported it. And it was one of the most beautiful moments of the whole debate for me was when they're voting this vote of no confidence, the members of the old government said, the protesters said, the government has not achieved anything worthwhile in all of the past year. And the members of the old government said, we've passed this brilliant education bill. And the members of the opposition says, it was a terrible opposition bill until we put all our changes into it. And a third speaker got up and he said, we should not be arguing over who contributed most. It was a good bill, but all sides had contributed. And he said this is how ideally democracy should work, not by people trying to demolish each other's idea. So to me that was a really high point, and it showed you how very broad the support was. It was both sides of the House were supporting it. The new government, I think, supported it slightly more than the old one. But anyway, they decided to continue. Now there was the final, I'm running out of time, but the final step in this argument was not in, that the law got passed in, I think it was November 1877. New schools started in early 1878. They were a great success. They got about double the number of pupils enrolled in schools that had been before. It was an amazing piece of work, but the Catholics boycotted it. And the Catholics were about a seventh of the population of the country. So it was a huge vote of no confidence in the new bill. And so somebody moved a resolution that they get back and give the Catholics subsidies for their school. And this led to an actually much nastier debate than they'd had the previous year, because people said, why are the Catholics boycotting this when they could have opposed it in the House of Parliament? They started thinking of all the bad reasons why the Catholics might be doing this. It was suggested that they wanted the biased history books because they wanted to import their views from Ireland, and about 4 Irish MPs got up and spoke to that point. It was really a bit of nasty feeling that it was developing, and they said it looked to them as though Catholics, but also some Protestants, wanted to bring into New Zealand the feuds that they'd had in Ireland. And that was really the main reason why it got failed. It never actually got voted out. They didn't want to debate it, and finally they didn't vote it out. They just dropped it off the order paper. And so that was, and of course now this is where this leaves us, is that we now know with great detail what exactly they were fighting for back then. And I think the main thing we're fighting was not fighting largely over religion, it was fighting over the civil liberties of people. So the key issue was not whether you had Christianity or not. The key issue was that you wanted to reach every child in New Zealand. And that was what really gave them their impetus to solve it and to decide in such a way and to make some fairly brutal choices along the way. They were absolutely determined that every child would get an education. And for me, in our court legal campaign, I'm hoping to bring this evidence into that case. And our lawyers, I won't be giving it as my evidence. They said this is a legal submission, so we will present that part of the case. But they now have got all this extra weaponry to fight the secular schools. So I found that very helpful. And I so now invite any of you who'd like to come and make a comment or a question about this issue? No, it depends which part of the 1960s you're talking about, because there was an education bill in 1964 which amended the 1877 Act and said that they could have religion in schools, provided they declared the schools closed, because the 1877 Act only said it should be closed during school time hours. So the 1964, they twisted that law saying it won't be in school time, but it'll still be part of the school day. I think that's back on.
I started school 1960, and I remember my mother saying not to talk to those Catholic kids that go to that other school, and she called them spics or something. I think she called them spics. But I was a child of 5 and I couldn't figure it out. They were my friends and I couldn't understand what the matter was, and it was never explained to me what was wrong with them.
They were called mix, which is short for Mickey Doolans. Why, I don't know.
Yes, I went to Napier Girls High School, and we had, it was definitely Anglican flavour. We had a Christian prayer, hymn, and I think a Bible reading, I'm not sure about that, all the way through mine from 59 to 63. I loved it because I was Christian and Methodist circle then, and I thought, to be in the same culture was great for me. But my Catholic friend who came from Sacred Heart that year because her father was a Protestant headmaster at Colenso, she came to our school and she used to say, "I'm not really supposed to come to these assemblies," she said. "These are naughty Protestant hymns." And she had a great sense of humour, and she didn't isolate herself, but she could have. She was supposed to, she said.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I went to Auckland Girls from 63 to 67, and we always started, and it was compulsory. You had to have, on the book list was a Bible and the hymn book, and the Catholics and the Jewish girls used to have to skip assembly, and I had a very confused religious upbringing because we came here to church on Sundays, and I was sent to a convent school to start with, and then finally got to a secular primary school. It was very confusing.
Pass that along. No, sorry, it's behind you.
I must be older than you because it was Catholic dogs stink like frogs in their mother's bathing togs. The policeman comes and kicks their bums and makes them say good morning.
For my closing remarks, I'd like to use the quote I've used before. May knowledge guide us, love inspire us, and peace surround us until we meet again.